And I thought we had.
Nancy, whoever's on the phone needs
Oh,
to speak up.
Is that Janet?
Who's on the phone?
Hi, Janet. We're just getting started.
Janet and Derek.
We're just getting started.
This is Janet Chairman.
Hello,
Right.
Janet. Bernard Green.
Okay. Okay, I think we have a quorum. We definitely have a quorum. So I think we'll get started because we will take get some additional people next door after a while. Okay, welcome everyone. We're very pleased that we're able to have an evening meeting finally. Once we got through, can you hear me better then? Once we got through town meeting, we had so many nights in November and December that were not available. We had to have some early morning meetings, and I know that was hard for the neighborhood, and I appreciate your patience with that. But we're going to strive to have the rest of our meetings in the evenings so that it's easier for people to come. I'm Nancy Heller, for those of you who do not know me. I'm the chair of the Newbury Zoning Committee and a member of the board of the Select Board. Let me just ask the other people in the room to introduce themselves and their affiliation really quickly. Roger, why don't you start?
Roger Lipson, I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 14 and a real estate attorney.
Bernard Green, a member of this committee and chair of the Select Board.
Heather Hamilton, member of the Select Board, not on this committee.
Steve Heiken, member of this committee and the Architectural Subcommittee, chair of the Planning Board, and member of the Housing Advisory Board.
Raul Fernandez, member of the Select Board, not on this committee.
Neil Wyszynski, member of the committee. I'm on the advisory committee, the Finance Committee.
Carlos Fidesco, I'm a member of this committee. I'm also on the Architectural Subcommittee and on the Advisory Board.
I'm Kathy Spiegelman. I'm on the committee, and I work in planning and real estate for Northeastern University.
I'm former Housing Advisory Board member.
Mike Glover, member of this committee, member of the school committee, and a town meeting member of Precinct 5.
Georgia Johnson, member of the committee and resident of Fisher Hill neighborhood.
And we have coming in?
Colin Cherlowski, school committee, so
And a member of this committee.
And on the phone, we have Janice Spearman.
Janet Bierman, Chairman of the Building Commission, member of the committee.
Okay. And who else is on the phone?
And we have Derek Choi.
Oh, Derek.
Hopefully you can hear me. I'm in the bowels of LaGuardia Airport. Just out of a meeting, struggling to find a good connection. I'm an architect, a member of EDAB, and also serve on the Architectural Subcommittee, and I'm a resident of Fisher Hill. Thanks.
Great. Just another remark. We're having a joint meeting tonight of the Select Board and this committee. We're hoping that there are going to be a number of decisions that we're going to have to make in the next couple of months, and the Select Board is going to be very engaged in that, so it's important that they hear the information, and we thought that having a joint committee would be an expeditious way of accomplishing that. So I'll talk a little more later about some of the process issues. I want to get going with the architectural presentation. They've been warned that they don't have much time because we have such a heavy agenda. So, Jennifer.
thank you very much. My name is Jennifer DePazzo Gilbert, and I am counsel for the developer. And here with me this evening are members of the entire team, both from Welltower, the owner of the site, as well as Balfour, who will be the proposed operator of this senior living community. And we were told we only have 10 minutes, and to condense our presentation into architecture, a brief update on sustainability and traffic. And
I hope you can all speed read.
And we are prepared to do that this evening. But before I turn it over to Sarge Gardner from Robert A.M. Stern, I just wanted to thank everybody for all of their time and their commitment to this project. It's really important site, a really important project, both for the town and for the owners. And we have had several meetings with the architectural subcommittee. We've taken their feedback. You've seen the progression of the project. We've been meeting with this larger group since early October. We've had a meeting with preservation staff to get their feedback, which was very helpful, and there have been numerous design changes to the project, which I think you'll be pleased with. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Sarge, and then you'll hear a little bit about sustainability and traffic. Thank you.
Wonderful, and happy New Year, everyone. So first off, right before the winter holiday, our team was extremely busy, and the focus of this presentation is a quick design update to illustrate how we've advanced. We've focused our work on advancing the floor plans, but specifically the elevations of the building and what you can see. And so you'll see in our views that there are now windows, there's architectural detail. We've really begun to, I think, very successfully articulate the building. So I'll run through this very quickly. So just quickly to restate our site planning objectives: the creation of 2 primary courtyards, the orientation of the main building mass along the eastern side, stepping down the volume of the building from the center of the site to Holland at the north and to Fisher Avenue at the western edge. And then finally, I just want to remind everyone that Mitten House is really our jewel. It is a important hinge that holds Holland Road and Fisher Avenue, and we're really excited that we're preserving Mitten House for the future. So just quickly restating our massing goals, and you can now see on the screen the views with more developed fenestration and architectural detail. To restate, we've always had a strategy of distributing the height of the building. I mentioned the narrow ends of the building facing the streets, and then as you see, as we're adding the architectural detail, trying to bring architectural elements, columns, stone walls, windows, things down to the pedestrian level to really create a friendly building for the neighborhood. A lot of that is about architectural detail, and that's sort of central to the way we compose elevations. The application of railings, porticos to define entries, chimneys and dormers to break up the roof masses, towers in specific areas, eyebrows, and colonnades. All elements that we're using to create a human scale to the building. We quickly wanted to show this slide again to reiterate a lot of the great progress that we've made. And a lot of that progress has been based on collaboration with both this committee and the architectural subcommittee. We've both reduced the size of the building in terms of area. We've reduced the height. We've reduced the amount of surface parking on the site. And we've also increased the structured parking below the building. So I think we've made a lot of progress from stage 1 to stage 4. So now we're just going to quickly walk around the building. This is a new view that you're seeing from Holland Road, looking at the Mitten House. You see how the north wing of our building steps down to Holland, becoming 2 and 3 stories. One sort of late-breaking massing move, we're actually going to remove the tower. We think as we've developed the elevations of the building itself is strong enough. It has enough architectural detail that the tower, we just don't think it's necessary. So that is a late-breaking sort of design evolution that we've developed over the last couple of days. So you'll still see the tower in the views, but we'll be removing it in our next iteration. So let's continue to walk around the building. Here's the critical intersection of Holland and Fisher. You see Mitten House in the foreground. You see the north wing to the left as it steps down and is anchored by a stone foundation wall. And then you also see how we're using dormers and chimneys in the roof masses to, again, break down the scale of the building. And then when we compose elevations, we often do what I call a local symmetry. So here at the end of the central wing, we've created a bay. We've softened some of the roof lines by adding what is termed a jerkin head. So it's actually the gambrel. When the gambrel is whole, it's like this, and you actually slice it off. And so it's a little bit more of a gentle transition for the building. Continuing around the elevations, we have columns which lower the scale of the central wing, and then on the southern side of the project, an entire volume that steps down to 2.5 stories, which will contain the interior swimming pool for the community. Here is our view, and I'll reemphasize, all of our curb cuts are coming off of Fisher. We've eliminated the curb cut on Holland, and so this is the view coming into the project, into the motor court. The motor court, and also please look at the model before you leave tonight. We have a one-story sort of breezeway that defines the eastern edge of that motor court. And then you can also see how our building is stepping down and is intricate and has a lot of texture to it. Again, all elements to break down the scale. Also very apparent in this image is the contrast in style. There's a decided contrast in style between Mitten House, which is Georgian, and our proposal, which is, I would say, shingle Queen Anne. That is that kind of contrast you see in Brookline. It is a typical approach after the Olmsted Plan was established in 1884. Houses by the same architectural firms, prominent architectural firms, were built in different styles. So I'm sure you know that from walking around your own neighborhood. So then finally, walking up Fisher towards Reservoir Park and looking back at the project, here we can see a residential structure on our right and the way that our building is coming down to meet the street. And then finally, in closing, a very important thing to us is the preservation of mature tree canopy. And one of the ways that we achieve that is actually a large portion of our building is actually sitting on the same footprint as the student center currently is today. And that means that we are going to be able to preserve more trees. So with that alarm bell, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Carrie.
Hi, good evening. I'm Carrie Havey. I'm a sustainable design consultant with the Green Engineer. So our project team came up with a series of efficiency strategies to make the building as energy efficient as possible. So the first one is we're adopting the town's no fossil fuel bylaw. Second, we are going to be reducing our energy demand. So we're going to be looking at right-sizing equipment and looking to insulate the building envelope as best as possible. We're going to look at harvesting site energy, so this could include photovoltaics or solar thermal. We're going to maximize our energy efficiency of building systems. So once we've reduced our energy loads, we want to design for energy efficient systems as much as possible. Next, we'll be performing building commissioning. So this will include building envelope commissioning as well as HVAC commissioning to make sure that the building performs the way it was designed and intended to. And then lastly, training for operations and maintenance. As we all know, this is key. We want to make sure that those energy efficiencies are realized once the building is operational. So our client is committed to sustainability. The client will be owning this building for the long term, and so they're committed to making sure this building is energy efficient and sustainable. So we do have a goal of a LEED gold certifiable project. And again, we are going to be complying with the town's no fossil fuel bylaw. In addition, we're going to be optimizing the building. We're looking at solar renewable energy measures, including photovoltaics, as well as solar thermal. We're going to be implementing some of the passive house and well strategies that you might be familiar with. So passive house would include looking at our building envelope and making sure we have a tight building envelope. And the well strategies are looking at health and wellness for the occupants of the building. In addition, we're going to be providing water efficient, low flush, low flow plumbing fixtures. We're going to specify healthy building materials, that's low emitting materials in particular. We're going to be providing healthy indoor quality air measures, and we're going to be optimizing the daylighting and views for the project. So I've been working with Verdant Landscape Architecture, VHB, and Horsley on designing the site to make sure that the site is as sustainable as possible. So some of the things that we've come up with for sustainable design attributes include providing visual and physical access to vegetation, designing spaces to support social connection, stormwater control measures. So we're going to maximize our on-site filtration using rain gardens and bioswales, as you can see in this image here. And then last, we're going to be looking at, we're going to install native and drought-tolerant plants, and this is particularly important at reducing potable water that we're using on the site. And those plants will also incorporate bird-friendly and pollinator plants. And then last, we're going to look at site sustainability attributes and circulation in particular. So electric vehicle charging stations that are going to be provided for the project in excess of what is required by the town. These will not just be for the fleet vehicles. There will also be electric charging stations available to the residents of the building as well. Bike parking will be provided on site to accommodate residents, staff, and visitors, as well as shower and dressing rooms for staff in particular. Wayfinding and site accessibility will be provided for building users. And last, full cutoff light fixtures that are LED lighting. And this will help with meeting dark sky compliant requirements so that we don't have a lot of glare at night. Right.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Vinod Kalik. Yes. My name is.
You have to speak, you have to get kind of close to it.
How about this?
Yeah,
Can
better,
you hear me?
Better.
All right. My name is Vinod Kalikari. I'm a transportation planner and a traffic engineer with VHB in Watertown. So we've been concurrent with all the progress that you've heard about the building architecture. We've been making tremendous progress on the transportation planning side of things as well. So I just wanted to give just a couple of minute recap on where we are with the study. We originally started with a pretty reasonable study area of about 10 locations, and then ongoing coordination with city staff. We added a couple more locations, and then as of the last committee meeting we had before the holidays, we actually added 5 more. So we're now looking at a total of 17 intersections and approach roadways in and around the site and the neighborhood, which is pretty comprehensive for a project of this scale. We also, in addition to looking at the area for transportation analysis and transportation impacts, we also looked at a couple of comparable sites in Burlington, existing sites that are in operation. And what we have found is that the actual numbers that we are looking at in the field are actually lower than the numbers that we presented to you before in terms of what the site could generate. So we are conservatively worst case in terms of the numbers we are assuming for analysis purposes. And we've been coordinating with town staff, both transportation as well as planning staff, getting inputs for our transportation analysis. We obtained crash data from the police department. That was one of the things we were asked to do in addition to looking at the state information. We also are looking at police data, working with the site engineers and the architect. We've been working on site layout and circulation for emergency access, deliveries, loading, parking, both underground as well as surface parking. And the detailed study that kind of documents all of this information is currently underway, and it should be ready soon. Just in terms of preliminary results or analysis findings that we have, for various reasons, both site-specific, the type of use that we are looking at, but also operator-specific. Balfour has specific transportation characteristics that are unlike other types of senior housing communities that you might have seen. For those reasons, and some of those are listed there, we expect there to be minimal effect on transportation as a result of this project. And some of those features, project in general is a low traffic generator compared to other types of uses. The peak times for traffic associated with this site, whether it's employee traffic or other users, those are generally offset from the commuter peak time. So you're not seeing an overlap of traffic between different types of sources that can compound the impacts. The employees work on staggered schedules over different times of the day, so that kind of spreads the impact over a longer duration and less impacts during peak times. And then Balfour has a series of operational features within their system, including shuttles and car services that reduce dependence for residents on their own personal automobile and also help reduce the number of single occupant vehicles, which are usually the cause of a lot of the congestion you see out there. All of these findings, again, will be part of a very comprehensive transportation study that we'll be submitting to the town. And then one last thing, there was a question, I believe, recently about 911 calls to the site and Balfour-based information we've gotten from them. Based on their actual operations, they expect approximately 4 calls per month. So that's about a call per week on an average. And that's primarily driven by the fact that they have 24/7 nursing staff on site, which is probably not a common feature in all of these types of facilities, but Balfour has those services on site, which helps reduce 911 calls. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You did a good job keeping it, maybe not to 10 minutes, but pretty darn good. Okay, we are going to have now a presentation from Pam McKinney, who is our financial consultant on the project. She's worked on several projects for the town, and she's got an impressive resume if you want to see it. And we look forward to hearing what she has, well, her analysis and what she has to say.
Supposedly on the desktop. Terrific. Yes, it is. There it is. Okay, cool. And somewhere here is full. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Terrific. Thank you, everybody. Nice to see you all. I will make an effort to speak into this thing. If I forget, you'll remind me. Thank you for having me tonight. As has been mentioned here, we were commissioned by the town a couple months ago, I guess now, to do a couple specific things, to look at the market for the proposed project, with an eye toward evaluating the positioning of this project and the likelihood of its success from a market point of view, the depth of demand, the nature of it in terms of the kind of beds that are being proposed, and then beyond the market, to examine the financial performance of the project with the view from the viewpoint of having seen the actual pro formas for the project. And I will say that, and I mentioned, I think, to Allison a couple days ago, I said I was going to give a little speech here before I dive in. Just to make clear that I've been given the direct information from of a proprietary nature with respect to the well tower pro formas. I'm operating under an NDA. I can't talk about specific numbers, but what I can do is to talk about how I see the proposal and the pro formas fitting within the context of the market. Again, not just in terms of the demand and support for the concept, but how rents fit, how operating expenses fit, how development costs, how land costs fit, how the economics of the project work. And the second point of my little speech is to simply remind everyone here that the town is in the midst of a negotiation with the development sponsor here with respect to a number of issues. And one of the things that I have been scoped to do is to provide advice to the negotiating committee with respect to land values in the component parts. And in the public presentation here tonight, I am not going to speak directly to the valuation issues. That is a matter for executive session. And I'll be talking about land values in general, but not with specificity for fear of jeopardizing the town's ability to negotiate on its, from a position of strength when we're behind closed doors. So, as I said, I've reviewed depth of nature of market, reviewed the well tower plans and program, reviewed the financial pro formas, and importantly have looked to the feasibility of this project from this market demand and financial point of view. So let's start, and again, this is going to be, the downside of having the economist stand up with a PowerPoint slide is that there are always too many words on the slides and not enough of illustrations and pictures. So forgive me, that is a hazard of the trade. And I'm going to go fairly quickly through this so that there's time for questions. What I want to do is to start with this market overview and to provide assurance that there is demand for both independent and assisted living units in Brookline, and the surrounding market area that demand is extremely strong. The population, and we've looked very hard at the demography of the catchment area for this, including age and income metrics, including acuity metrics, and the population that is likely to be targeted by this is growing. It is affluent, and it has very substantial assets that can be deployed to support the cost of annual independent and assisted living occupancy. And I think what is important in the evaluation of the demand for a project of this sort is indeed that senior segment, but more than that, it is the capacity of the market to both afford the level of service and product quality that's implied, and also that it have a demand and a need for the services that are being offered by virtue of the acuity of that population, the need for assistance with daily living. And as you know, this is a project that includes both independent seniors as well as seniors who are in more need of services. Someone asked at a meeting the other day, is this a life care community? And I wanted to find a way to say at some point in this presentation that no, this is not a life care community. It's not a CCRC. It is a senior living residence. And that distinction is important because this project does not include skilled nursing. And if this were truly a CCRC or truly a life care project, it would include a pod of skilled nursing beds to complete the continuum of care from independent through to assisted. So the demand is here strong for both the independent and assisted beds. I'll also say that the memory care beds are the demand for those is particularly strong. We see with our developer clients who are in this type of market an increasing desire to include a pod of memory care, partly because the demand is there, but also, frankly, because the pro forma for those beds is very favorable. It helps the economics of the project to be providing that component of service in the project. So both benefits to the consumer and to the developer for including those memory care units. One of the things that we observe in the Boston market, and in particular in the inner market, is that there have been very few units delivered to the market in recent years. As the market locations that can meet the requirements for feasibility, which means the need to be able to charge high rent, to have absorption certainty, and to adhere to the growing demand, it's just increasingly difficult to find sites that are capable of supporting the kind of project that you have to be able to build for feasibility. And as a result, the pipeline for projects of this sort just has not come close to satisfying the demand. And of course, as you know, I recognize that there are at least a few boomers and older folks in this room. We are becoming more numerous, and the demand for this kind of housing is growing in the face of it's becoming increasingly difficult to find sites that can accommodate the product that is needed. And I guess finally, the last thing I'll say, and this is, I'm sure, obvious to most of you, this is an extraordinary site. This is not a plain vanilla site when it comes to meeting the attributes of a feasible, market desirable senior living project. It's extremely well positioned to capture the market. And it is a lovely site in a lovely neighborhood with proximity to services, to culture, to medical institutions, to all the things that confer value and, frankly, help to enable the project to support the kind of rents that are implied for the kind of product quality that we see in the drawings. And I would also say that the program, not just in general, but the program is a match to the market, meaning that it's 160 beds, split roughly half and half between independent and assisted. And in the assisted side, split roughly half between what I would call conventional assisted beds and memory care beds. So 80, 40, and 40, roughly, in proportion. And I'll simply say that that mix, that 50% mix of independent to assisted, is a part of what makes the operational viability of the project work. It is also true that in terms of scale, those 40-bed pods on the assisted side are really what is needed for operational efficiency. It's interesting. You can go all around the world and look at these projects in other parts of the country, and see that those operational requirements, that those 40-bed modules are really important to maintaining the operational efficiency of a project of this sort, where you've got staffing and food and beverage services and healthcare services. There's a size and operational requirement for an efficiency in that 40-bed pod. I guess the other couple of things I'll say just about the match to the market is that the unit sizing here is right on the button in terms of its comparability with this kind of product as we see it being developed in other places. Again, there are operational standards with respect to bedroom sizes and unit mix, and it's important to understand that the target for this is an upper end target. This is not an affordable project, affordable in quotes, in the sense of its commanding subsidization from state or federal programs. This is a market rate project targeting the high end of the market, and the quality and character of the design as we see it and the nature of the operation, it's very much targeted to that top end. And this is a long-winded way of my getting around to saying that in the independent category especially, large unit sizing is going to be critical to the ability to draw the market. This is not a downsizers or value seekers project. The folks who will be drawn to this, that will need to be drawn to it in the independent living category, are folks who are coming from big houses with lots of things and with the need to accommodate a lifestyle that is consistent with where they're coming from. And that means that this is not we sometimes see projects being targeted to mid and low income parts of the market, and in those cases we also sometimes see a value seekers approach to the programming, which is to try to make the units as bed sizing as tiny as possible in order to assist with the affordable requirements if in that when you're targeting to that mix. But that is not what we're talking about here. And I guess again I offer that commentary about mix and sizing and so on, and the array of amenities and services that are being offered here, as caution that the project can really only succeed if it can deliver at the standard that is being presented. It is not. I sometimes joke when I am talking to other developer friends of mine that you cannot deliver the Taj Mahal to a market that can only pay for the split level ranch. You have to match the product to the market aspiration, and if you have a mismatch in the cost and quality of the development, then to the affluence and the nature of the product that you're building to satisfy demand, then you will ultimately have a problem. Let's talk about the financials. And I don't know whether we want to allow questions here or whether we'll wait for them to the end, but I'm Neil. Okay, so we'll just keep going. So we have evaluated income and expenses. The rents and occupancy assumptions by bed are consistent with what I would call best-in-class offerings in the local market. Among those are Waterstone at Wellesley, Waterstone at the Circle. We've also looked at others, including projects in Lexington and in Dedham and in Westwood, others that are at the top end of their sphere. I would call the revenue estimates, and by that I mean the rents, as being somewhat aspirational. And what I mean by that, Paul Sanger actually asked me a question the other day. Well, what do you mean by aspirational? What I mean by that is that they are top of market, the rent assumptions. They are, when you do an evaluation like this, what you'd love to find if you're testing feasibility are, 5 projects that are charging more, 5 projects that are charging less, and you're right in the middle and you say, aha, no worries. And in this case, we're talking about rents that are a little bit above the top of the market competitors. But what I said to Paul was that the product quality here is also above the top end of the market competitors. It's consistent with the quality of the program and the service package that is being proposed. It's not crazy high, it's just a little bit high, and that's consistent with the quality of the project being somewhat above the competitors. The operating expenses are very much on the money with respect to the ratios that we see in the marketplace. The cost per bed compare favorably with again, these projects. We've looked at both the rents and the expenses per bed for these competitors. And once you adjust for differences in acuity, of course, if you have a project which has more assisted living, for example, you would expect those expenses to be higher per bed. But if you adjust for the mix that's being proposed here, we're right on the button. And the operating margins are also on a percent basis consistent with market expectations for things that have a similar RevPOR. And RevPOR simply means the revenue. That's a metric that we use when we're trying to compare one project to another. It means revenue per occupied room. And so when you have project statistics, you distill them down for each project into revenue per occupied room, and you look at those because if the RevPORs are really different, it means that they're targeting different markets, and then you have to be careful about how you draw the comparison. In short, the income and expenses leading to NOI, net income here, are very much within the market range, so then we move from there to look at the cost. What does it take to deliver and to build, to buy the land and to build a project of this sort? And one of the very important things that we have looked at is the price that was paid and the price that can be supported by this use on this part of the site. Because, of course, if you've overpaid and you're trying to get your whole project to support an overpayment on the land, then you know you've got trouble, and you've got to find another way to balance the equation. And it's also important, irrespective of what's been paid, to look at what the market value would be for a site commanding this use and this program, this 160-bed program. So we've looked at comparable sales for mixed bed senior housing sites. In affluent markets, again, it's important to select the right comparables, including some ones that are mentioned on the prior sheet, comparables of what was paid, as well as others nationally, because, again, this is competing in a set that is not a plain vanilla set. And so we've had to go out of market to look at what's being paid for high-end projects in other places. And what the market comparables tell us is that there's a range in value for senior housing sites, again, targeted to the top end of market, at between $105,000 and $110,000 per bed, or between $85 and $95 per square foot of development. That's a gross square feet, after adjustments for demo and other extraordinary site work. And once we account for the amount of demo that is necessary to build the project that you've seen pictures for, the value for the underlying land, the market value for that underlying land is about $17 million. That is what the marketplace would say is a reasonable and supportable price for a 160-bed high-end project on that site. And as I mentioned, we've also looked at the site in whole, what was paid for it in the aggregate. That's a question that's been asked. And as to, was the price paid in the aggregate consistent with the market value, given the academic use and the terms that were imposed on the transaction, which some of you may or may not know. The terms of the transaction were that the property had to be sold in whole. It could not be broken up into 10 pieces or 5 pieces and sold in individual pieces. It had to be sold in whole. That was a condition that was imposed by the Attorney General on the transaction. And the price that was paid, in my opinion, was a very fair price given those conditions. Had the project been able to be broken into pieces, I believe the sum of the pieces would have been greater than what was paid. In other words, the price that was paid reflects a discount for bulk. It's a wholesale price. It is not the retail price, the sum of the retail price of the parts. And again, that's an important distinction. So, number one, they did not overpay. Number two, they paid a price that is reflective of that bulk condition that was imposed on the transaction. There were, in fact, bidders willing to pay more, but they didn't want the whole thing. So anyway, for what it's worth. Moving on, we've also looked at the development costs for new construction and for the reno, and they appear reasonable, but I will tell you that that they feel a little light to me, meaning they feel a little, if when we use the term aspirational on the revenue side, we mean high. If we use the term aspirational on the cost side, we usually mean they're a little bit low. And I'll come back to that because that's an important factor in the feasibility of this. The FF&E on a per bed basis is consistent with comps, and we've got a lot of comps for what people are spending to outfit the units. FF&E is furniture, fixtures, and equipment. It's all the pretty stuff inside the rooms. The soft costs and financing costs are, again, within the market range. The developer fees are in the market range, maybe even a little bit light. Contingencies, I believe, are somewhat low for this stage of design and given the complexity of the project. And the pro forma, I'll just say, includes an inclusionary zoning contribution of about $6 million, which, again, I'm an agnostic on that number, but it's important to know that that is what is being carried in the current pro forma. The returns, now this is where the feasibility analysis sort of hits the road, the rubber hits the road. The return on cost is the metric that developers use to establish whether or not they have a deal that can draw capital to the project. In other words, that investors would invest in given the revenues that can be generated. It's the relationship, it's literally a little math formula, the net operating income from the project divided by the total development cost. And the stabilized return on cost for this project, as it's been pro forma'd, is very thin, extremely thin. In fact, with threshold yields for this kind of project in the 6.5, going to 7 range, I can tell you that the returns on cost for this project, as it's been pro forma'd, are below that, or below the low end of the threshold range. Now, it's not like they're radically low, but they are not at the level that one would expect to see if you were going to take a project to investment committee and have it sail through. And so it's important to know that the return thresholds for this are also aspirational, we'll just say. And that is in a project which is carrying a market value for land with the risks of an aspirational revenue and an aspirational cost. So it is, it's a great site. And I think that what I would observe in this presentation by the developers is that it is a feasible project, but the capacity of the project to withstand, I'll just say out loud, withstand a lot more requests for public benefits or to request reductions in the scale of what we see, again, affecting the operational efficiency of it, reductions that would, or changes in the mix, again, that would impair the operational efficiency of it. Those sorts of changes are likely to, again, just simply reduce the return to something even less than what we are seeing in the numbers. So, again, thin, but feasible, as a friend of mine would say, you know, optimistic but achievable. And so that is ordinarily the developer's perspective, correct? Right? Is to be optimistic, but to also with a dose of reality in the mix. And that is all I have to say. But I would be delighted to answer questions.
Thank you, Pam. All right, well, why don't we open it up first for the committee members to ask questions. Carlos.
I think you just answered my question with the last sentence you did, but I wanted to
yes.
Make sure I ask it. The architectural committee, we talked a lot about the size of the project,
right.
And we tried to talk about it for the site, independent of what the program is, because we don't know necessarily what you just told us. So the question I wanted to sort of emphasize was, if you reduced the project from 160 to less than 160 units, or if the units are smaller or just less of the assisted, or sort of independent living and so forth, does the project fall apart?
In my opinion, yes. I think that the number of independent living beds is especially important here to the viability of this. Those are just think about it, those are the units that have the highest rents with the least service cost, right? So from an internal perspective, they are helping to, I don't know how else to put it, to cross-subsidize they're helping to pay for the rest of it. And with respect to the unit sizing, these are not folks who are looking for a value. They're not particularly a value-seeking market, at least not insofar as making big compromises in the lifestyle that they are accustomed to. And so the notion of reducing, again, don't get me wrong, the unit sizes here are much smaller than the houses that they're coming out of. But they are not, they're not cheap apartments.
No, I think you had your...
Sure. Hey, thank you for this analysis. Appreciate it.
Yes.
I have my question really is around, so in my experience, I mean, you've sort of, this is looking to me like, I mean, you mentioned high-end, wealthy, not a value-seeking market you just mentioned in terms of the folks that are looking to live here. And in my experience with premium products or services, the margins are actually greater. Why, but I didn't see that here. Is that not the case with this kind of product or service?
It's all about what it costs you to create it. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not to suggest that the margins are poor by any means. Don't get me wrong. I mean, the amount of net income that's left over after you pay for expenses is quite significant. I mean, it's as I said, it's within the market tolerance. You know, we would expect to see the net here to be something on the order of 65% of the revenue that you take in. That would be normative. But if you're constructing a project to the quality level that is necessary to draw the revenue that's generating that margin, that's where when I say the margins are thin, that's where the returns on cost are thin, because the cost is has to be fair. It has to be quite significant in order to create the product that is needed again to draw the revenue at the top on the top line.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we'll talk more about this, but I do have some concerns about sort of the Taj Mahal for wealthy senior living and the what I think is a very low amount that's being proposed right now in terms of the inclusionary zoning, which is well below where our bylaw stands right now. So I've got some
and I think I just misspoke. It's the expenses that are the 65% proposition, and the income is the 35% proposition. I think I scrambled those in my head.
Okay. Thank you.
Do we have other questions from committee members? Paul.
I have a two-part question, Pam.
Sure.
That goes beyond sort of the specific market and financial analysis you did. So I assume as part of your investigation, you were able to get a sense of the reputational quality of Welltower, and I guess just as important, or perhaps more important, Balfour as the operator. So I'm curious what you heard on the street. That's the first question. And then my second question is, I'm going to ask you to speculate, based upon what you know about Welltower, as to why they would be interested in doing this project, potentially at a stretch of a return. And I'm going to fill in a little bit of a blank. It's my understanding that this is one of only a handful of direct development undertakings that Welltower has done, and that those undertakings are in major metropolitan areas like this. So this is a very, very large company, a $45 billion REIT. They own a lot of operating companies, like Pyramid and Sun and others. And typically, I think that's how they have built up this massive portfolio. So could you talk or speculate a little bit on why they're dabbling in direct development with this?
Well, I suppose that's really a question that you should be asking these folks directly, since they're sitting right here. But I guess what I would offer is two things. First, both these companies, from everything that I have read, and I will say that I've not done any direct consulting for any of them, so I don't know them personally. But reputationally, they have a very strong reputation for delivering what they say they're going to do, and for delivering at the, again, especially that Balfour operating entity is very capable of producing the kind of, so the pictures that we see, they're operating these in other places. So this is not this is not out of their comfort zone by any means. I would also simply, and I've said this before, and I'll simply say it again, this is rare. This site is rare. Both in terms of its macro location in Boston, which has one of the our metro area, Brookline. It has the depth of cultural and healthcare amenities that cannot be matched in virtually any other place. And when you're trying to attract we'll call it retiree plus market, those attributes are extremely, extremely important. And so in terms of the competitive nature of this site in relation to other opportunities across the country, again, for developers who are not local and who have the wherewithal to look at that full range of opportunity. This Brookline site remains a very rare opportunity, in my opinion. And again, I can only imagine that if you are a developer with a big portfolio and a desire to build on the reputation for being able to play it at the top of this market, there just aren't very many places where you can do that. But again, I would encourage you to ask that question directly, because I think that you have the folks sitting right here who can give them who can give the real answer, not a McKinney speculation.
I'd like to move on, if I could, to the audience. Are there people who want to ask questions or make comments? Okay. Why don't you come step up to the mic? I'd like you to start out with, how many people are there? Okay, we'll do 3 minutes, and I'll time you. Okay, Mike.
So I'll give you two of my 3 minutes back. I'm Mike Sandman, chair of the advisory committee, which is the town finance committee. There's a certain tension in some of your conclusions. It's very interesting that the site is unique, and I think I can understand that. And yet the rate of return is, you feel, is sort of stretching a bit to get to the standards. How sensitive is that rate of return to the $6.1 million that's in there on a pro forma basis as the zoning concession, zoning component?
What I would tell you is that every dollar that you add to cost has a negative impact on the returns. We are, as I said, this market, given the complexity of the kind of project it is operationally. Remember, this isn't an apartment development. This is a healthcare and hospitality operation, which has an operating business risk attached to it. It's not just a real estate operation. And ordinarily, you would be striving for returns, as I mentioned before, approaching a 7% yield. This, I've seen people do to 6.5 in the very best cases, but this is below that. And so the short answer to your question is that as you grow that, any cost, again, whether it's the affordability requirement or whether it is the need for more contingency because you haven't baked in enough, all of those have a negative effect on the returns. Again, pressing it further below the low end of the range.
Right, I understand that, but that's why I asked the question. But I suppose I could sit down with a spreadsheet, but I'm much too lazy to do that. And what I'm hoping is that you've done a little bit of that because there are borrowing costs that
Yes.
that factor into this, and the rate is obviously going to be sensitive to those. How sensitive is that?
It's quite sensitive. I mean, I think that this is the returns on cost are measured in hundredths beyond the decimal point. Okay? And so as you know, every, we'll call it 100,000, 50,000, is going to have an impact on the hundredths. And so, again, I think that it would simply be my observation that any significant increase on the cost side, and by significant, what do I mean by that? Will $10,000 crater the deal? No, of course not. But I think as you grow those numbers, you know, beyond six places, right, you start to have a pretty serious impact on the rates of return. I don't know if that helps. Okay, sure.
Okay. Yes.
Sure.
Please come to the mic, Ruth Ann. Thank you.
This is not the question I planned to ask, but it's the one in my head now. What's the rate of return considered over time? How does that factor in?
So, of course, as revenues grow, the rates of return grow also. And there's another measure of returns, which is more of a dynamic measure over time, an internal rate of return. But that is not the measure that is, generally speaking, used to establish feasibility, because you have to be able to have a starting point that doesn't put you in the hole as time, you know, that you can never catch up from. And you have to be able to attract capital to a project, knowing that the capital has choices, that it can choose to go elsewhere. That's I think really the stickiest, toughest part of this is that that return metric, that return on cost metric, is in fact the metric that the marketplace uses to decide whether or not it's going to come or not. After that, you hope, frankly, with a 6.5% return, you're going to do a heck of a lot better. Frankly, you have to do a heck of a lot better than that over time, or you know, you can't withstand what is in fact a very low rate of return at the front end. You know, if you think about it, the cost of borrowing isn't much more than or much less than 6.5. So there's very little in it if you think you're going to be at 6.5 forever. That just isn't going to work. So, you know, I think what we ordinarily see, of course, is that the revenues grow and 6.5 becomes, you know, 6.6, 6.7, 6.8, 6.9 as time goes by. But it is the starting point that you have to worry about, because if you can never catch up if that starting point is too low. Okay.
Ken.
Thanks, Pam. Thank you, Pam. A real quick question. The west side lot and 125 Holland Road, called Holland Hall, did they figure into your pro forma? And is the margin is still as thin when you consider the potential value of those two properties?
The pro forma here is we're running it pure on the senior housing project. We are not looking at, well, gee, maybe you subsidize off of the other side. As I said at the outset, I think that the value of the whole, and this is as far as I can really go here in answering your question, I think the value of the whole was a fair value for the terms that were offered. But I'm not prepared in this context to start talking about what the component pieces are worth from our valuation. There will be, and somebody save me here, there will be a time.
Yes, then you will have an opportunity to speak directly to the committee in an executive session about some of these issues.
My point is only, it's not quite as thin as it seems when you look at the other parcels, right?
Well, I mean.
Depends on how much we pay.
It depends on, you know, that's not money in the bank. Oops, I'm sorry. Understand that what might be achieved by the transaction of the rest of it is not a certainty at this point, right?
Can I follow up with something really quick, because I don't want our applicant to think that that means that I'm against their project. In fact, I want to say, I really support the architectural plans and what they've done. They've really shown a great responsiveness to the community, and I, for one, am going to support at least the architectural piece of this. Thank you.
Thank you. There were other questions. Yes, Paula. Please come to.
I don't want to go so much. Can you just clarify, in one part of your presentation, you said 180 beds.
160.
I'm sorry, 160 beds. In another part of your presentation, you said, I thought I heard you say 160 units. I just wonder if you can clarify.
Yeah, it is.
Microphone.
It is 160 units, 80 of which are independent living, some of which may have 2 beds, and 80 of which are really beds, meaning they're occupied more or less by single individuals, although there'll be some double occupancy in some of them. They're units, but you know they are 1-person units as opposed to 2-person units.
It's not like it's an Alzheimer's ward, for example.
There's a memory care section of it which will have, you know, again, understand that in the assisted living side of things, those units are generally speaking studios and ones, meaning that they're set up for single person with a partner kind of occupancy. To some will have a partner, but most of them will be single person occupancy.
Other people from, well, you've had a chance for saying, there are other people who've got their hands up, and let me allow them to speak first. Yeah, Susie.
Hi, Pam. Susie Roberts. My question related to your discussion about the cost benefit, and I was wondering if you could take us through that. You alluded to XYZ being needed in order to make the costs work, and I would like you to explain that if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Again, without talking about specific numbers in the pro forma, what I will tell you is that the mix here of 50% independent and essentially 50% assisted living, those larger independent units are one by one delivering more return to the bottom line, more net income to the bottom line than the individual SRO, we'll call them single occupancy units, whether they're conventional or memory care, simply because their service demand is much less. There's not as heavy a health care requirement, principally. It's not the only issue, of course, but the health care component that is burdening the assisted and memory care units is not as prevalent on the independent side. So it's that cross-subsidization, if you will, within the pro forma that helps to support the mix that's being proposed. And as you whittle away, or were you to whittle away on the independent living part of the program, either by reducing unit sizes and therefore impairing not just the rent, but perhaps the marketability of them in this market, you start to eliminate or reduce the cross-subsidy that those units are creating for the balance of the project. The whole thing, in other words, has to hang together as a piece, or it starts to devolve, or becomes something very different. It becomes something very different.
Yes. Please introduce yourself too.
Michael Liebman, Seaver Street.
Mhm.
I mean, obviously there are a ton of moving parts. This is a circular function. Sorry. And so it's hard to actually know what to say, what has meaning. Obviously, we're going to make the assumption that you guys are going to do a good job at negotiating all those parts that we don't know about.
I hope so.
To make sure that the numbers are what they are. I guess I always thought that, yes, NOI makes a difference, but internal rate of return over time is an important thing because you're not investing on the short term, you're investing for an investment horizon. So I would argue that the IRR is an important thing to be thinking about, and if there's dynamic expansion of their revenues more than their expenses, then that's a good thing and something we should take advantage of as the town, but put that aside. The other aspect that, the bulk of the project, if we make the assumption again, we assume 160 units, we assume all those things, if we assume that is correct in what it's supposed to be, that doesn't mean that it has to manifest itself in bulk above ground. And that, again, we had talked at earlier times about what aspects of the subsurface of this project were potentially available for other uses, other program uses, anything that could be used to lower the apparent mass of the project without interfering with the program of the project is something that's a benefit to the town. Because if one of the things that we're concerned about is the mass of the project, we don't care what's going on underground. This could be a single-family house with 150,000 square feet underground, we'd all be happy. So since that's not going to happen, then maybe we should be as careful as we can at maximizing the amount of, non-essential, non-pro forma busting program and put that where it does us the most good from a visual standpoint. And again, I've spoken out negatively or advocating these kinds of things on an ongoing basis. And notwithstanding some other discussions that have happened in the past, this is not to say I'm not in favor of this kind of project going forward. I'm in favor of this kind of project going forward in the best possible way from the town's perspective, in a way that doesn't bust their program.
Thank you. Yes, there's a hand up there. I can't see the face, but, oh, Linda.
Hi, Pam. Good. Hi, Linda Olson-Pelkey, town meeting member from Precinct 2. I just had a couple questions. One is specifically for the sustainability planner, and I was surprised to hear that with an indoor heated pool that they are going to not seek a waiver? No. There is going to be a waiver.
So that's the only element that we don't think that we can meet the new bylaw that was proposed.
Uh-huh.
So, but we're looking at it, and
There's a waiver for heating water in a building of this size. You don't need to avoid natural gas for hot water, domestic hot water in a building of this size, which I assume would include a pool. That's actually.
Oh, so it's the whole hot water system is going to be asking for a waiver?
Even under the current.
No.
The bylaw provides for the hot water system. I don't think it provides for the pool.
Yeah, that's.
It doesn't.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, okay. So this is going to be partially gas. Okay. Yes. I really wanted to speak to the favorable opinion that I have of the site design elements that we heard about. And I think they're really super important for the livability and also just the microclimate and the wildlife. And so I guess we maybe have Blair to thank for that. But I just want to say keep that We like it. It's great. And then just a general question. So we heard that the rents were going to be aspirationally high, but that the operating costs were going to be kind of normal. And I'd just like to put in a plug for paying the, if we're gearing this whole development to wealthy individuals, then I think we need to think about paying the employees enough to live in Brookline. So I don't know if that was factored in to the operating costs. I know. But I'm just saying, let's look at the operating side of it, and are we adequately compensating the employees?
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's on record.
Okay, there's another hand up right there. Yeah.
Could some of we came from the same condo community, could we come up together?
Sure.
Hi, I'm Philippa. I'm from Olmsted Road. Philippa Brusso. Sorry, Philippa Brusso from Olmsted Road.
I'm Mike Mello, also from 6 Olmsted Road. I happen to live in a unit that's on what we call the backside of 6 Olmsted that will face the property directly.
And our main concern, our main concern is that there is a new curb cut being put in that's going to run directly parallel to the fence that is directly parallel to our building. And it seems like it's going to be a very high traffic sort of situation with emergency personnel, employees, residents, garbage trucks, any number of vehicles coming in and out. And so I'm just wondering, I guess maybe it's the building committee, whether this has been considered. I know that there has been somewhat of a buffer improvement, and we appreciate that, but it still does feel like it's going to have a big impact on the residents of our street. So I guess we just wanted to state it for the record.
Let me ask the traffic.
I also live at Olmsted, and I would like to jump in and add one other thing. I'm not sure whether or not the committee has considered in part of the impact of this road. This development on Olmsted was specifically targeted to families and families with small children. And the amount of exhaust that's going to come from having that be the only access in and out of this unit, with the exception of the front access that will let some cars in, but the trucks and the deliveries and the emergency vehicles are all going to create not the healthiest environment for the children that are growing up in this development that's dead-end street, that is probably less than 50 yards, 40 yards from what is basically being proposed as a road, not a driveway. If it's the only way in and out, it's a road. It might be dead end, but it's a road. And I noticed from the change in design, it no longer goes around and out, which means a lot of these emergency vehicles are going to idle there. They're going to have to turn around and do three-point turns. And this is really sort of a health impact as much as it is a traffic impact that we're concerned about.
First of all, I'd like to ask the traffic consultant if he could comment on what you think are the what your analysis is on the amount of cars coming in and out.
As I preliminarily mentioned in one of the slides, this development, actually the numbers that we assumed for the analysis are actually on the higher side than what we are actually observing in the field based on existing developments of this type in other parts of the state. But that said, we're talking about 3 curb cuts. The curb cut the southerly end of the site, which we're talking about closer to Olmsted, that provides access to the employee, generally the employee surface parking lot and the loading area. The resident parking, for the most part, is underground. It's under the structure, and that's not accessed off of the southerly curb cut. It's actually accessed off of the middle curb cut, which is farther away from Homestead. So again, when you take the limited number of, either daily trips or peak hour trips, obviously it is higher than single-family homes, but we are not talking about hundreds of cars that are going to be going in and out of that southerly driveway causing the type of congestion we are talking about. The numbers are relatively small. Obviously, they're higher than a single-family development on that site, but much lower than some of the other larger generators that you could have on the site.
Okay.
And not all of those numbers are going in and out of that single curb cut.
Could I relatedly ask why the...
Could you speak into the microphone, please?
Could I relatedly ask why the Holland Road curb cut was eliminated? It's already existing, and it was removed from the most recent plan.
It's not necessary for our functioning.
Couldn't it have connected to underground parking and just provided another outlet?
The existing
Sarge, could you go to the microphone?
Yeah, we're bringing the exhibit up. We deemed the Holland Road curb cut unnecessary, and also the sensitive nature and the domestic quality of that street. We felt that the 3 curb cuts, as shown in the exhibit on the screen, adequately accommodate the circulation.
So you deemed the one over there unnecessary, and then you created a new one, which was necessary. So you didn't need that one.
Can you go to the microphone?
So you took away a curb cut because it was unnecessary, and you added a new one because you're saying it is necessary.
No,
Why don't, so that
curb cut is existing.
that curb cut right there down the bottom on the left is not existing.
You want to show them where the...
I'm referencing this curb cut here. So the circulation pattern drop-off for residents happens here. This is access to the underground parking for residents, and then residents then circulate in front of Mitten House and can exit here. Residents can also drop off here. The turning radius is adequate so that you can actually turn around here and actually exit back onto Fisher.
Right, so, but the bottom curb cut, right? That's a new curb cut that's being put in.
That's
Right,
correct.
right on the crest of the hill. We're putting all this parking, right?
Can we show what the existing one is, the parking?
Yeah, if we just moved the existing lower
The
south.
existing curb cut is about right there.
Right, and it's
Yeah,
moved
right.
it south, yeah.
It's right across here.
And the trash is gonna be where it always has been, in the rear. And covered this time, but we're covering it. It's not covered, it wasn't covered for the university use.
But it uses-
But emergency vehicles will go to the main entrance and turn around in that upper, the middle curb cut. The emergency vehicles aren't gonna go into that back. It's definitely not a roadway.
So touching on what the earlier gentleman said about putting parking underground, I think this is a perfect example of what we should be doing with the space under the property, and taking that parking and all the cars that are going to be parking there, all the service vehicles that are going to be going in there, and putting that on an entrance on Holland Road where there's a building right there. They don't have to drive all the way around and disturb all the 100 people that live along Olmsted Road, whereas there's maybe one house over on Holland Road that it will affect. So getting rid of all the parking that's along there and putting it underground would do a great deal for making this property be a part of the neighborhood, which is a neighborhood of single-family homes, that have some of them are nice and large, but some of we want to feel like this is part of the community. If you look at the Olmsted Road design guidelines, those are a perfect example of what the town did back in 2011 to try to make sure that the new houses that were being put in here felt like they were a part of the community and a part of, the rich history that's Fisher Hill. And I think that we need to try to maintain that.
Thank you for your comments, and I would hope that the architects will look at that and see what accommodations can be made.
On another note, I live on Olmsted Road, right next to the Longyear properties, and I think the Longyear properties, if anyone goes up there and looks at that, that's a perfect example of a failure in the town planning to do right by the neighborhood, and I want to make sure that we don't make those same mistakes again.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Yes.
My name's Pam Lodish, and I'm on the advisory committee. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 14, and I live in the neighborhood. My question to you is, I see here conflicting stories being presented. We have architectural concerns by some people, traffic concerns by others. We have, at our recent town meeting, we talked a lot about affordable housing and about the concern for making housing for residents of the town. And I see, and my concern has to do with has to do with passing this through town meeting and what our strategy is going to be to make that happen. Now, so the question I have really is, how can you help us understand the actual property taxes that you expect to be generated from this and compare it to what others here in the room might prefer, which would be an affordable housing complex? I mean, I think that this project is beautiful and high-end and not appealing to many people in this room. However, I just came from the BFAC meeting where we talk about a huge structural deficit in the town, potentially, and unmet needs for schools and other things. And so how will this help us get to some of our goals, but crash with others?
Right. I think you've got some important points there, and Leo is going to speak to it.
Yes. So we are working on the fiscal impact and the fiscal benefit, and that's a work in progress. But let me talk to the bigger town meeting question. There's a lot of moving parts here, and what's going on the east side of Fisher Avenue, this project is just one of a number of moving parts. So one moving part is, how are we going to comply with the affordable housing, the inclusionary zoning aspects of our zoning bylaw? That's a work in progress, and we're getting assistance from the Housing Advisory Board. And by the time the town meeting warrant closes, we have to have a proposal on that. Another piece is what's going to happen on the west side. And for that, Welltower has offered to the town the opportunity to acquire the west side. And that is a moving piece. We're currently in discussions with Welltower on how to do that and how much it's going to cost. But the bottom line is, what's going to have to be presented to town meeting is a package that looks at the east side, that looks at the west side, that makes a proposal with respect to affordable housing. And there's also the possibility, and perhaps even the likelihood, that if we are going to acquire the west side, we will probably need to do a debt exclusion in May. So this may have to go to the voters of the town. So this concerns the Fisher Hill community, but it also concerns the town as a whole, and so the interests are broader than just the Fisher Hill community, and we have to address all those interests in the package.
Thank you, and we are working, I will assure you, we're working hard to do that. We will be meeting on a regular basis, negotiating with Welltower in the immediate future, and we expect to be able to present some of the results of that in a few weeks in a more public setting. If there are no other questions, okay, Ruth Ann?
I can't believe I'm about to say this, but I don't think Welltower can afford to move to Brookline. Yeah, I don't think they can afford to come here. I don't think they understand the value of what they're getting. They don't understand the value of what we have to give up to give it to them. And the only analogy I can make because I'm an elementary school teacher, that if you were a farmer and you had a great piece of land and you wanted to grow something that's valuable, but it took 3 years to come into fruition, or to germinate, whatever it grow, you would take time and let it grow. You would make value out of it. You guys are so eager to pull crops and get your money back that you're pushing us too hard, because I actually came with an ask. That was my reason for coming this evening. I want Welltower, through the good negotiations of this team, to offer and commit to giving an annual donation to our senior center. And not specifically the senior center, but the multi-center service corporation that's nonprofit that has funding for seniors in our own town. I'm delighted that your friends are rich. We can have ripples on economics, and we can support the things that we want to. And I think if I understood you, Pam, you said there's not any give. They can't afford to give the town anything. They can't. I mean, I know this is where the wrestling comes up, but they can't afford it. So I think you speculated. I don't know what you do, but you're a corporation. The hurt won't be that bad. And Neil, I want you to put the senior center on the negotiation table.
Thank you, Ruth Ann. Okay, yes, one more question.
Oh, I get to be last?
Yeah. Okay, we need to wrap this up because we still have an executive session, and we would prefer to go home before midnight.
My name's Wendy Henry. I live on Olmsted Road. Previously, I was a town meeting member in Precinct 10 in Coolidge Corner, so I understand congestion and how it has an impact on the neighborhood. I have a concern in parts of the ways that this project has been presented to us, and in conjunction with what Neil was talking about, I know that there are a lot of moving parts, and right now there's a lot of unknowns and speculation. And I see a presentation that says, well, we looked at 5 comparable sites. We don't know what's going on the west side. We don't know what impact that will have. We saw part of the presentation saying, well, you know, the traffic will mostly be offset from commuter hours. If school goes in there, they let out at 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock. That is not commuter hours. Those are also offset from commuter hours. So I would urge that we really look at what the actual possibilities are for the other sites and then look at the impact. I'm not sure if there's details of where they did their comparable studies on your website or on their website, but I would be very interested to know sort of what they considered to be a comparable site, because Chestnut Hill Avenue is loading up with traffic, which means people use Fisher Hill Avenue all the time to cut through, and then we'll have at least 2 sites that they're not controlling between the Holland side and the west side that we don't even know. We're speculating on what will go there. So I just have some concerns that right now the prospectus is oversimplified in terms of what the impact will be on the community.
Thank you. There was one other person, yes.
Hello, I'm Judy Rosso, and I live on Dean Road. And I am not in favor of this project.
I think you've said that before.
I'm going to repeat myself because there's maybe a new audience, or to affirm that, at any rate, I'm going to ramble on. And one of the things I want to suggest is that Brookline take a page out of Newton's playbook and take the land by eminent domain, as they have just done with Webster Woods. That's one idea that you could consider. The massing is massive, and it is not in keeping with the neighborhood. And I feel that Olmsted is rolling over in his grave. The 160 units increases the neighborhood residential population by 40%. There doesn't seem to be any consideration for those of us who already live there, and what impact all of this for years to come will have on us and on the roadways that are already in shambles throughout the neighborhood. And when you drive through Cleveland Circle, your car becomes a rattle trap once you've gone through there. So putting traffic back and forth through there impacts everywhere. In terms of emergency vehicles, it's kind of naive to think that there's only going to be 4 emergency siren-related vehicles going through this residential neighborhood per month. I don't think that's realistic. I think there will be many more.
Well, I believe assessment based on the fact that they're nursing services. But go ahead, you have another minute and a half.
I think Brookline is already full, and it is full not only of residences and people, but cars and trucks and all sorts of vehicles running all over the place. The new Waterstone is just down the block. It appears to be full. This particular site, whereby it's a grand site, is not within walking distance of any commercial area for the residents to go up and down that hill to get anywhere. My mother-in-law lives in a Waterstone residence. Her current rent is $8,000 a month. She has a 2-bedroom unit. And one of the things I want to allude to is staffing and the need for high-end staffing for this kind of high-end unit to be created, and the getting a chef to provide high-end meals for these high-end residences is very difficult, and the fall off is tremendous of the chefs. The food gets poorer and poorer.
Okay. Please conclude.
The staffing could be difficult with today's limited immigrant status. Keeping chefs is difficult. It seems to me that the assisted living side would in fact cost more overall in view of the fact that there needs to be assistance assisting those needing assistance. So I don't quite understand that piece. The impact of this whole piece is quite in your face, in my opinion, and we are not our neighborhood, Fisher Hill neighborhood. We are not a major metropolitan area, but a single-family neighborhood, zoned single-family forever, with 400 residences already.
Right.
And that's enough.
Thank you.
It's a very special neighborhood and an unusual neighborhood. And to just make it the place where only the most wealthy can live is unreasonable. This development was just described as a healthcare and hospitality project, and that doesn't seem to fit in with this single-family neighborhood area. And I don't know or understand why it's necessary to change what's already a good thing and come in and break it further. And it feels like
something is going to go there. So whether it's this or it's a educational use, a big school, something is going to be built there.
The right and the opportunity to make those decisions. And that's what this is all about right here and now. And when you build a big, huge new development like this, it creates the dog chasing its tail, whereby if they're not creating any new affordable housing, then affordable housing has to be created someplace else, which just stuffs and stuffs and stuffs an already full town.
Thank you very much, Judy. And if you have other comments, you could always write an email, okay? Thank you.
This is a public hearing, and I feel like we have enough time for everybody to have what they need to say. Thank you very much.
Any other questions from the audience? I believe Steve had wanted an opportunity to ask a question.
Thanks. Let me borrow one of your I had a specific question for Pam and a more general one. The specific question, when you were talking a little while ago about the fact that the independent living really helps, in effect, cross-subsidize the overall project, quite a bit earlier you said that the memory care units also contributed positively to the pro forma. I was wondering why that is and how that relates to what you said about the independent living later.
Yeah, it's simply a matter of the high demand for those memory care beds and the willingness of that market to pay a high rate. It doesn't mean that there's a lesser operating expense associated with it, but proportionally to the assisted living beds, that segment of the market simply pays more. So I wouldn't want you to think that that is cross-subsidized, that those units are cross-subsidizing, but they're not needing as much of a subsidy, let's put it that way.
Well, they also occupy a lot less space, so
Yes,
you can get more
exactly,
than.
exactly.
But,
More efficient.
I do want to sort of thank you for your analysis. I know the last time the architectural subcommittee met, we had in previous meetings asked the design team to kind of make the building smaller and see what more space they could push underground and modifying the access and use of surface for parking. And to my mind, they've done all that. I said I was unwilling to push them further until we heard from you about how the operating characteristics of this development, because as you said, it's not a straight real estate deal, affected what needed to be on this site. And to my mind, you answered those questions as to whether there could be fewer units in this project when you talked about the operating sort of sweet spot of 40-unit pods, of which this project is basically composed of 4, and the size of the units, some of which I thought were large, but I also happened to go visit Linden Ponds, which isn't maybe quite as high in the market, and they have 2,000 square foot units there too. I was surprised to find. So I do feel like I didn't want to push the design team further without hearing from you. I think you've substantiated my reluctance to say, make it smaller, cut the units, make the units smaller. But just to take one step back, the big picture here, and some people have alluded to it, is this is a single-family site, and when you did your overall analysis of the value, to what extent did you take into account, and one of the conditions of the sale was that it could not be conditioned on any zoning changes, that the developer had to take their chances, and we will be having to come up with a rezoning or an overlay zoning for this site and probably the other sites, the West Side and Holland Road as well, which will then have to be approved by town meeting. To what extent do you factor in the risk of that rezoning out there in your analysis of the viability of the project?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the 17 million that's been carried in the pro forma is a permitted number. Okay, that is for a senior housing site that can be developed for senior housing. I guess what I'm referring to when I say did they overpay or this notion of bulk to retail, those values, the ones that we've cast for examination of that question, are based on an academic use as it sits. So it's not based on tearing it all down and turning it into single-family lots. It's based on an analysis of what institutional users, 501c3 educational users would pay for a property improved as we see it.
But you also said the price they paid penciled out as appropriate for a development of this type on a per bedroom or per square foot basis.
Yes, for a senior housing development, they're carrying in the pro forma an appropriate amount. They're not packing it with cost, excess cost of acquisition. They're carrying it at a reasonable market value for a senior housing use.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I think we've. Michael?
We have another hour's worth of work.
We do, and please email, okay? Thank you. All right, we have one piece of administrative business. I want to add additional members to the Newbury Negotiating Subcommittee. First of all, I've asked Michael Glover, who had to leave to go to another meeting, but he's agreed. Kathy Spiegelman, who former Housing Advisory Board member, and also Roger Lipson, an attorney who's had negotiation in real estate experience, as has Michael. Add them to the Newbury negotiating subcommittee of this body, so that we have spread the expertise a little bit. We also make it easier to make sure that we have quorums when we're in such a tight time frame, and we have people who are going in and out for vacation. So I would like a motion, please, if I can have it.
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
On the phone?
Janet? Are you
Janet?
still there?
Aye.
Aye. Derek, are you still there?
I think you said aye.
Oh, he had to catch a plane.
Oh,
Okay, so we'll move ahead then with that. Thank you for that. I just want to add a couple of things. First of all, as Neil said, we have a lot of work to do here. We have a project that's got moving parts. There's essentially 3 buckets. We need to merge them all together, but we also have to negotiate them independently. There are complex questions around them. And we will be working very hard to do that in the next few weeks. We've already worked hard to get to this point. A lot of the town staff is engaged, town boards. The developer has been coming consistently to the area to further the goals of the project. And I do think that we need to keep moving as fast as we can if we're going to make May deadline. The developer recognized that March, having a special town meeting in March, was not going to work too soon, and so now we're shooting for May. That means that the project has to be pulled together and put on the warrant by May 5th. I'm sorry, March 5th. So we have a lot of work to do in the next couple of months. I'd like to schedule the next meeting of the zoning committee, a public meeting. We'd like to do it in the evening, trying to avoid those early mornings. I'm proposing February 5th. How does that sound to people?
It's a Wednesday.
It's a Wednesday.
That works.
That's okay with me.
Works for me.
Wednesday.
Wednesday, February 5th.
Oh, February 5th is Wednesday.
Right.
Yeah.
Works for me.
Okay.
Janet?
Thank you, Janet. Works for her.
Okay, great. Georgia, you're okay? Paul? Kathy? Carlos? Neil? Okay, great. And at that time, we'll figure out if we need a joint meeting with the select board as well. But now we have on the calendar, you all know that we will be meeting on February 5th. Okay, I propose that. Yes, 7 p.m. Thank you.
Right here, right?
Yeah, I hope we can get this room, yeah. And that'll be posted. We're going to, I'd like to go into executive session now, so I need to advise the committee about that. We would go into the executive session for the purpose of considering the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real property for Newbury College located at 110, 124, 150 Fisher Ave and 146 Hyslop Road. If the chair declares that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body, and I do so declare. So all those who are in favor of going to executive session, it's 9 o'clock at night. Paul? Georgia? Yes. Roger?
Yes.
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 Okay.
And Janet. Now let's
Okay.
put the select board on.
Okay.
executive session.
So now the select board needs to.
Okay. For the record, I will repeat the magic words. I move that the select board go into executive session for the purpose of considering the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of the real property of the former Newbury College located at 110, 124, and 150 Fisher Avenue and 146 Hyslop Road, Brookline, Massachusetts. If the chair declares that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body, and I so declare, all in favor, Ms. Hamilton? Is she here? Oh, I'm not sure we have a quorum.
Yes, we do. There's three of us.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye.
Nancy, is this executive session for full, or just a negotiating session?
Stay here. Okay.